This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Great. So welcome everyone to the Shorter Roads Go a Long Way webinar hosted by the New Brunswick Association of Planners. My name is Caitlin LaSalle and I am a member of the association's Continuous Professional Learning Subcommittee. We're thrilled to have you here with us today. We have about 65 folks who have registered for the session, which is a great turnout. For those who missed sort of Susan's comment earlier, it is pretty timely with the changes that are happening in New Brunswick right now with local governance reform. And so hope everyone gets something out of it. A couple of housekeeping points. It will be recorded, which we just heard, and shared along with the slides for the presentation on the API website within the next week or so. We only have about an hour, so if we could keep questions until the end, we can do a formal question period then. That being said, feel free to post your questions in the chat at any time and we'll monitor those and make sure they all get addressed. Keep your mics on mute. 2 years in, I feel like everyone knows that. Unmute yourself to speak. For registered professional planners or candidate members, this is one CPL learning credit. So you'll be able to log that on the CIP webpage. We'll create a drop down for this. Would love to introduce our two presenters for today. We have Tristan Cleveland and Paul Deck. Paul is a planner with Upland Planning and Design based in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. His work focuses on development planning, main streets, urban design rules, strategic growth planning, and the complexities of land use planning and infrastructure development. And Tristan is an urban planner and researcher with Happy City, a consultancy that uses the science of well-being to create healthier, happier, and more inclusive communities. He's also a PhD candidate at Dalhousie's Healthy Populations Institute, where he conducts research on how to transform car-oriented communities to become healthy, thriving, walkable communities. Tristan's writing on urban issues has appeared in Strong Towns, National Post, Spacing, and elsewhere, and he has spoken on the connection between urban design and well-being in cities around the world. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Tristan and to Paul.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Yeah, we couldn't be more excited to share with you our research on network efficiency, on street network efficiency, and how to build new communities and infill our existing communities in a way that builds wealth and improves our social opportunities, costs all of us less, and generates more wealth. So that's our goal for today. So Paul and I met each other years ago when both of us were working in nonprofits working on creating more sustainable development. And we wanted to figure out some kind of indicator to express to people why high density communities matter, why it is so much more cost efficient. And something that we landed on was this idea of road length per resident. So if you think about what is going to drive the cost, how much taxes are you going to have to pay as a taxpayer? A really critical question is how many meters of road are there on average per person that you have to cover? Because if you got to cover 10 meters of road, that's going to cost twice as much as 5 meters of road. And road is the single biggest thing that cities pay for after, of course, staff time. It's a huge driver of costs. And it's not just the asphalt that needs to be maintained, it's everything that the city needs to deliver and other levels of government need to deliver from home to home to home. So snow plowing, transit, school busing, being able to provide emergency services within a certain amount of time, so they have to be located close enough, garbage pickup. All of these things are related to the average amount of road that there is, the average length, so to speak, between homes. So we first started working on this 6 years ago, and we published some of the key central research in the Canadian Planning and Policy Journal in 2020. So the first part of this presentation is going to be looking at some of that work, and then we're going to be doing a bit more of a deep dive in some of our thinking and research since then.
So the way we went about this particular research is we started off by taking the road network from Statistics Canada that they provide for the census years. And in order really focus on this idea that Tristan has just been introducing, which is to examine how much road length is needed in order to service either businesses or homes that are in the city. We wanted to focus on exclusively those roads that provide frontage to homes and businesses. So we have removed from this data set all roads that don't serve that purpose, such as provincial highways. They're more needed for long distance transportation, so they're not all that relevant for the purpose of our research. We have removed like all driveways that just serve individual properties, federal roads, and anything else that wasn't really required. And after running this algorithm, we had now this road network that really just serves the primary purposes. And then we applied the boundaries of census tracts from census years to that. Census tracts are in so far handy because they always cut off at a total of 10,000 residents within one boundary. So they're used in a very uniform way, and there is less of a risk of having some modifiable area unit problems with that. So within each of these census tracts, we've just added up all the road network there is to serve homes and businesses. And yeah, that gives you a number of typically a couple of kilometers of roads for each of these census tracts. And we divided that road length for each of these tracts by the amount of population that is located, and arrived at numbers of road length per resident, which you can see here on the screen. Those are expressed in meters. So for instance, we're from Halifax. Halifax was the first city that we started this research in. And in Halifax, in central areas of the peninsula, you have road lengths per resident of started at 1-2 meters per resident, and then it keeps going up as you go away from the core. And in ex-urban areas, you start reaching double-digit numbers, so more than 10 meters of road to support one resident in those areas. And so that gives you a lot to play with and analyze looking at those maps. But where a really interesting point emerges is when you put these numbers on a scatter plot chart with densities. So have a look at that picture that emerges here for Halifax. So we have on the x-axis the net density for each of these census areas, and measured in residents per hectare. And on the y-axis, we have the corresponding road length per person values for the same. So starting in the bottom right, you have the densest census tract within all of the Halifax regional municipality. So that is about 100 people per hectare. So in that area, road lengths per resident are predictably very low. And then as you move to the left along that chart, first, not a lot happens. Even if you go down in density by 20, 40 residents per hectare down to 60, there isn't a very noticeable impact on how that affects road lengths per resident. But something starts happening as you approach 20 residents per hectare. Suddenly, as you move towards suburban and ex-urban areas, and especially in the ex-urban areas, the road length per resident just explodes and go up, and you get this curve that is looking like a hockey stick. And suddenly, in these ex-urban areas, there is so much more road length added for decreasing densities. So that is Halifax. Then in our research article, we looked at 9 cities across Canada. And this is, for instance, Oshawa in Ontario. A similar pattern here again. And on the next one, Sherbrooke, Quebec, it's again the same pattern. And what you can see really well here is, in this case, Sherbrooke, for instance, doesn't have areas that are as dense as in Halifax. So the densest census tracts have population densities of around 50. And nevertheless, the shape of the curve looks just exactly the same, right? It starts off at a different point, but then from there, as you move to the left, you have that same relationship between density and road length per person in the low density areas. It goes up in a very quick fashion. And yeah, looking at the other charts, it's the same pattern for London, Ontario. It's the same for Windsor, Saskatoon, moving through the prairies, Edmonton, Calgary, and on the West Coast, guess what? It's the same as well. So really what we discovered by putting these numbers together is that there is sort of a natural law how density and road length per resident interact. And you can, plot all these trend lines for all cities on one joint chart, and you really see that there are slight differences, right? In some areas of net density, for the same net density, some cities are a little better on road length efficiency than others, but generally it's the same principle. And what you can even do is you can calculate a trend line that shows an average curve for this nonlinear relationship, and that essentially predicts across Canada, if you have a certain density, how much road length per person will you need to support that type of development. And it really shows that why this is really important is because it really shows how ex-urban areas that have been developed around car-centric principles just use up so much more resources than other areas of the city. So just look at the table. So again, in the bottom right corner of that scatter plot chart, when you're in densities of 40, 50, and above, right, going down one step from, let's say, 47 residents per hectare to 46 doesn't really add a lot of roads per person that you need to build, maintain, service, plow, replace, and so on, right? It's only you go down by 1 person per hectare, and it's only 5 centimeters per person that you have to add. If you do the same, if you go down one step in density from 33 to 32, becomes that number doubles. Suddenly it's 10 centimeters per person. 18 down to 17, you're already adding 1 foot of road per person. And then as you go into the ex-urban area, starting at densities 10 and lower, for going down in density by 1 resident per hectare, that's already a meter. And then from a very, very low density, you may be even adding 10 meters per person. So this really creates some issues for municipalities in ex-urban areas. So this is, for instance, one called Kingswood in the Halifax Regional Municipality. And this one has been developed at road length per person of 14.6 meters per resident. And the reason why there is just so much more in infrastructure you need to fund here as taxpayers is because it's just such extremely low density at which this area has been developed. So this is a typical Google Street View picture from the area. You just see, right? You have the road that needs to be maintained and plowed, and you have all this ditch work, and all of that length of the road is in many cases primarily supporting a lot of lawn and free space that is surrounding single-family dwellings. So it's not a necessarily very efficient use of funds. And one thing we've been looking at closer in this academic article that Tristan mentioned at the beginning is we started comparing those road length numbers with data of urban cover provided by Statistics Canada. So you can see here in the sort of red tinge, the areas that Statistics Canada has recorded as urbanized by 1971. And in the sort of brownish overlay, you can see the areas that have been categorized as classified in that land survey by, categorized as urbanized in that land survey by 2011. And what you can really tell from this is that in the past, until approximately the 70s, cities have largely been built by default in a way that was compact. And it was only then in the 70s something happened. And I mean, that something was presumably the proliferation of the personal motor vehicle, and just a shift in philosophy that we started to build our exurban areas around that technology that then has become so widely available. So yeah, it was really only after the 70s that we start seeing exurban areas at road length for resident values in the double digits. What's also really interesting about this tool of not thinking so much about densities, but about road length per resident, is when you compare those values over time. So here, again, we have the Halifax census tracts, and we've been tracking the numbers associated with road network efficiency from 1996 to 2016. And what you can see that over those 20 years, some areas, so the green areas, right, they have reduced their road length per resident. So they have become more efficient, right? They're adding wealth and economic activity and residents faster than they add expenses. And so this has happened to various extents in the green areas, partially just through infill development or partially through greenfield development that was very efficient. And then you have the areas that are showing up in red. So there are roughly two categories of these areas here. You have some established neighborhoods where nothing has really changed, like there was no new development, street network hasn't obviously changed, it rarely does in fact, which is why looking at roads is so important. But anyway, so in those areas, you know, household sizes likely have declined, so there is less population in the same area on the same road network. So these have become, in terms of economic activity population compared to road length, a little less efficient. But then there are the other areas which are outside of the city core in exurban and suburban settings that have simply been adding road length faster than they've been adding population, and growing in that way. Those are these further outlying areas that are showing up red on this map. By adding roads faster than they've been adding population, the road length per resident has been increasing in those areas over the last 20 years. I'll hand it over to Tristan.
So that was most of the work that was in that academic article. So we decided, though, that we wanted to add something to this analysis because, you know, the purpose of an urban street is not only to serve homes. It's to serve homes and jobs, right? The economic life of the city. So here in Cole Harbour, there is one example of one of the weaknesses of the road length per resident measure by itself. So if you look at the numbers for Cole Harbour, Paul?
Sorry.
If you look at the numbers for Cole Harbour, this is for a completely car-dependent post-World War II suburb, and the numbers at 4 to 5 are higher than downtown Halifax, but comparable. And some of these suburbs in other cities are really kind of comparable to downtowns, and we wonder, well, why would that be? And it's because these communities actually have so few roads. They have these enormous blocks. Many of these neighborhoods have absolutely no roads connecting them. You have to go forever to get over. So they achieve low road length per resident by completely sacrificing walkability and by making transit completely ineffective. So 2 points to make here. One is, if you are going to use road length per resident as a policy tool, as an indicator, it absolutely must be paired with an explicit policy for efficient blocks, for walkable blocks, because you don't want people gaming the indicator in this way and just sacrificing walkability to achieve efficiency that way. So that's the first point. And happy to answer more questions on that later. The second point is, well, this picture will look different if we measure road length per resident and job, because there's almost no jobs in these neighborhoods whatsoever. So when we look at the comparison of density to road length per resident, Paul, then you get that same pattern as you get for road length per resident. So it checks out. It's the same basic logic that as the density of residents and jobs decreases, the road length per residents and jobs really goes on a steep path upwards. And it also does a really good job differentiating different parts of the city. So you see that in downtown Halifax, it's extremely efficient, less than 1 meter per resident and job, and many neighborhoods are less than 3. If we go back to Cole Harbour, their numbers are still relatively high, so still in the 4 meters per resident and job range. So it helps differentiate those kinds of communities a bit better. And it maintains that distinction with the exurban communities that have, 4 or 5 times more or 10 times more meter per resident and job as compared to those compact, efficient communities. You can also, we took a look at actually some New Brunswick communities since we'd be talking to you today. So this is Moncton, and you see in the core here, these 2.6, 3.1 meters per resident and job, and that's clearly more efficient than the outlying areas. It also tells me I bet we could achieve a bit lower meter per resident and job in the core of Moncton. So it gives a nice goal to try to achieve. If we go over to Fredericton, we see a really nice, efficient core with 1 to 3 meters per resident and job, and much higher, about twice as high in the outlying areas. And then in the exurban areas, many times higher. There's one hinky thing here still, though. If you go to industrial parks, so places that are just, really, really big blocks still, but lots and lots of jobs, such as this is Burnside in Halifax, an industrial park, it looks really efficient because there's very few roads and many, many jobs. But we actually think this is a good thing because the kinds of jobs you find in an industrial park are in logistics, manufacturing, warehouses. These are inherently car-dependent jobs. So if you're going to have a car-dependent environment, then go ahead, have those really big blocks, reduce the cost of road per job as much as possible. It's in our walkable areas where we want to achieve that efficiency by having a tight network with many jobs and residents living on that network. So we've been talking so far in terms of reducing the road cost per resident and job. But those efficient places are also going to produce more revenue. Because if you look at the store here that's next to those homes, that store adds value to those homes, more convenience, more things to do. Those homes are adding value also to the business because they provide customers for that business and keep it open. So if you look at the tax assessment per square meter, it is way higher for communities that have less road per person and job. So as there's less road to pay for per person and job, the amount of revenue coming out of the city just goes up and up and up. Costs go down, revenue goes up. That's a really, really good path for the future of the city. So to illustrate this is not a deep dive technical analysis. This is just an illustration, but I think it's helpful. We added up the total tax revenue for all of these census tracts. And then for each census tract, we multiplied the length of road by the average maintenance and servicing costs and capital costs of roads within that census tract. And so we minus one from the other, total revenue minus the road costs. just kind of a toy, simplistic version of the road costs. And what we found was, of course, the central areas are extremely lucrative. And the outlying areas, the ones in gray, break even roughly, and the red areas cost the city more than they pay in taxes. And that's before we add all the other categories of costs, everything else the city needs to pay for. We're not even getting to that. This is just, and the pure road costs themselves already, that's eating up taxes in those areas and not leaving money on the table for all the other things that a city needs. So here, so far we've talked about costs and revenues for maintenance and taxes, but there's also major implications for the cost of transportation, because when you have places where there's lots and jobs and residents in your meters of road, many more people are going to walk and bike, creating less traffic, creating less wear and tear, creating less costs associated with transportation. That's exactly what we find. So when we look at the communities with low road length per resident, Paul, you get almost all the communities where lots of people walk or bike to get to work are under 6 meters of road per resident and job. And the ones that are especially high are those ultra efficient ones, under 2 meters per person and job. It's the exact same thing for transit. Above 6 meters per resident and job, almost nobody takes transit anymore. So you really need those efficient places to generate this kind of transportation. And in driving, it's the opposite picture. Above 6 meters of road per person and job, you get almost 100% of people driving to get to work, creating much bigger costs in terms of traffic, wear and tear, expanding roads, and all the other social implications such as climate change and pollution. Those are costs to the city and to public, but there's also major costs to individuals, because if you live in a place where you have to drive to do everything, you're going to more people are going to need to own cars. So in this slide, in the lower end of road length per person, and this is just per person because this is from our old research, we found that there is far lower car ownership on average. So in places with 2 to 4 meters of road per person, about 1 in every 2 people own a car in Halifax. Whereas above 6 meters of road per person, car ownership goes up to roughly 1 car per person. And when you consider that a car costs on average about $10,000 a year, that means that over the lifespan of paying for a house, say 20 years, that's $200,000 that is being added to the effective cost of house. So that's huge personal expense being imposed by the requirement to drive because the network you live on is not efficient. And then it also saves people not only the cost of owning a car, but in the most valuable resource of all, which is our time. So when we look at communities with low road length per resident and job, the proportion of people who can get to work in under 15 minutes is much, much higher. Some places, 50% of people can get to work in the amount of time it takes to eat a sandwich. And, so that's freeing up all that time where instead of being stuck in traffic, they're being able to get more work done or spend more time with family or enjoy the things in life. And actually, there's separate research that shows that when people spend less time commuting, they're happier on average. They have higher social capital, the divorce rate lower. So it's extremely important that people have this time given back to them. So you put this all together, and we're proposing a model of network efficiency. So on the bottom left corner, we want to lower the infrastructure costs per person, make sure that we have less linear infrastructure per resident and job in the city. And then on the top, we want to increase the property tax revenue. You want to create communities that are highly lucrative. And the bottom right, we want to reduce the cost of transportation, both for the city and for individuals. And you achieve all these things through basically the same means, which is making sure that you have that mix of residents and jobs on an existing walkable street network.
So let's look at a practical example for all of that. So A tool where this research can be really well applied is scenario planning. And in the last 2 years here with Upland Planning and Design, I had the opportunity to do exactly that, and to use some of that knowledge gained from our research in the growth management strategy for the community in Inverness in Cape Breton. So what's special about Inverness? Inverness got 2 world-class golf courses in the early 2000s. It was a fairly sleepy town before that, and development and tourism has just exploded after. And the municipality is trying to manage the effect of that and trying to see in which way can we direct this growth, right? And how can it occur? So our partners on the project, Turner Drake and Partners, have come up with these population growth projections for the project area. And essentially, they have established an additional need of 490 housing units. So this is the project area, and we know over the next 30 years, we have to add 490 housing units to this area. Now, there are, of course, many different ways how that can happen, right? It could be ribbon development, it could be highly concentrated. And how we started off in this analysis is we ran a GIS-based land suitability analysis, first of all. In a workshop with the municipality, we have come up with a weighting for several factors, ecological factors, physical factors, right, such as slopes, floodplains, servicing factors, how far away are you from municipal infrastructure, and also social aspects such as how close are you to amenities such as grocery stores, doctors' offices, pharmacies. So with all of that, we established some priorities, how to weigh off these different domains with the municipality, and I've come up with a land suitability map that just shows here, you see this on the screen, and green areas are generally suitable for development, red are not. So red areas, are excluded. So we have these green and perhaps yellow areas that we can work with here. And there are, of course, various ways how you can accommodate growth in those areas, right? So we have come up with some hypothetical growth scenarios that are based on some considerations working with the municipality. And one scenario, for instance, is showing this addition of 490 units in a concentrated low density growth. There was a deconcentrated version to that as well to show some effects of that. But then the most concentrated growth scenario we have come up with that seemed realistic under the circumstances there was allocating those 490 housing units in this fashion with a strong emphasis on multi-unit dwellings. And now using this approach of road length per resident, you can really give the municipality some numbers, right? And say, well, this is what you're creating here. And in this case, scenario 3 adds, accommodates those 490 additional housing units in a way that results in 2.5 meters of road that you're adding for each new resident. And, well, how do I go back here and go to meeting? There we go. And the first scenario adds 5 meters of road per new resident, right? So that's double the number in terms of expenditures for infrastructure. And then, you know, you may always get someone on council or from the public that says, well, but this is low density development, it's more valuable and creates all this extra assessment. Well, not really. So when you're looking at the assessment gain here, that's estimated, you're around 70 million, while the scenario that creates only half of the expenditure for infrastructure is just, you know, marginally below that at 63 million. So the tax revenues you're getting from these two scenarios are very comparable. But you know you'll be just paying so much more for infrastructure, and not only for this first time. Well, the first time when it's being installed, you may even get this infrastructure for free from the developer, but then you're locked in essentially forever to replace those roads, maintain them, plow them, and all these other secondary costs that go along with that. So this is something I've been working on with Upland over the last 2 years in Inverness. The project is still underway, so the final report will come out this year. A similar project that I was hoping to present today, but is not quite there yet, is the Charlottetown growth management strategy. So there we even went a step further and we estimated with engineers the average cost of the construction of subdivision roads and how often they need to get replaced and so on, and factored that into the numbers as well. So yeah, so there's some really interesting pictures emerging there. So this is also another study to be published, hopefully sometime this year, that to look out for. And finally, one very simple thing that every municipality can do is just to add these insights into policy. So we started advocating for this road length per resident value for many years now, since 2017. We've given presentations on that. And to our knowledge, one of the first municipalities in Canada that started implementing that in their policy is the city of Colwood on Vancouver Island in BC. So they actually have put it into their equivalent of a municipal planning strategy, their official community plan, saying that they're aiming at development with road lengths that doesn't exceed 6 to 7 meters per person. So yeah, so that gives you a bit of a practical application perspective on this whole subject as well. And that ends our intro presentation to that subject, and I'd like to open it up for the Q&A. Wasn't really watching the chat. Doesn't look like there are any questions in there yet.
Thanks, folks. Yeah, I guess, nothing in the chat, but if folks would like to unmute themselves and just either comment or question or just spurring a discussion, we'll open it up.
Hi, it's Susan here. I have a question. It's kind of a simple one. I'm curious why the calculations were done with population as opposed to dwelling. So, for example, if you're looking at the communities that are on those more rural roads, even if you added, 10 kids to those houses and increased the population, you still only have 1 to 2 people paying taxes and paying for those roads. How would that have influenced your calculations, and is that relevant?
Tristan, you seemed like you want to add something to that.
Oh, please.
Well, I mean, both metrics are interesting. You can certainly use the road length per dwelling metric as well. Road length per population has a bit of a perhaps stronger interpretation of how much economic activity and how many people are accommodated in the area. Road length per dwelling maybe is more of an consideration from a purely infrastructural perspective, like how many dwellings do we provide. I think that's the main difference. Really, both ways to approach it have their merits. And yeah, in the last project in Inverness, we were looking at road length per dwelling. Just for consistency of our presentation, I actually ended up calculating and converting that into road length per resident. But they're similar.
Yeah, so for tax considerations, it's the dwelling, it's the property that pays the taxes. It's not the individuals for municipalities. So we've always been looking at both metrics, and you don't usually see a huge difference in the patterns, but we certainly recommend taking a look at both. But we did focus on one for consistency in this. And it's like Paul said, one is more relevant for supporting businesses and for active transportation, etc. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I just wanted to say super. Thank you for answering my question.
There is a question in the chat, or a couple are popping up there. So from James Coons, any thought toward matching tax assessments towards infrastructure capital and maintenance costs?
Something that I've always supported, making sure that if someone wants to live next to a lake, requiring lots of infrastructure in an ex-urban environment, that they pay for that, and hopefully that would mean that you would get a more proportionate amount of people choosing that. It would, there is a risk that people would use that as justification to build lots and lots of ex-urban environments because, hey, we're paying for it. And I've seen some of that with condos, etc. These condo approach to ex-urban development where the condo itself pays for those costs. And the trouble, though, is that it doesn't capture those other elements that we were talking about of efficiency, where you're not getting the, all those people are still driving to get everywhere. So if you're trying to build a city where you support high rates of walking, biking, and transit, less traffic, where you're trying to support more people getting around and participating in the economy with lower costs per the daily activity of city life, then you don't want people spreading out that way, even if they pay for the roads themselves. The other barrier to that policy in a practical sense is that, of course, if you impose those kinds of taxes now, you get a lot of low income, lower density communities that would end up having to pay very high taxes. So when Halifax looked at doing that, I think it was about a decade ago, the policy got thrown out because of the equity implications.
Yeah, there is an interesting comment from Gerard in the chat that the city of Dieppe has between 2001 and 2007 using a combination of assessment per road kilometer and population per road kilometer. Do you mind sharing how exactly those values were used and what kind of the reaction and impact of it has been? Yeah, sounds like an interesting story.
Yeah, I think it did bring density to an area that didn't have a lot of density, and it was taking in a lot of immigration development, a very high growth rate in that period of time. I think it was the 5th highest for cities of less than 30,000 in Canada or something like that. But it did bring a whole amount of discipline to municipal council when they were looking at major developments that were being proposed. And I kind of certain I was city manager at the time. Some projects were refused. They were just said, no, it's not viable enough and everything. The other thing that it did is when developers came in with projects, the city we had put a fund to do full analysis of that development and to see if we could enhance it. And the municipality went ahead and worked with some developers and even invested in some infrastructure to ensure that it was better, higher density, and a number of other, and also infrastructure, because they were thinking of a 20 and 30-year time horizon. And excellent. Because of that happening, there is one development that developed twice as fast as it was projected.
It developed twice as fast. It attracted people faster?
Yep. Yes, because the municipality, we would hire landscape architects, we would arrange the subdivisions, we would make those calculations, we would do a number of things, and we would show the developers that they're making us much money. So in one instance, we're expecting to sell about 25 lots and houses a year, and they had a 400 lot expectancy, and in their time frame it doubled. So for the municipality, they got a lot more tax quickly, and for the developer, it was way more viable. But
yeah,
but there was a lot of work with developers, to do that.
That's so fascinating. And to me, having played with these numbers a lot, I find perhaps the most useful application of this metric is thinking about how a city changes over time. Is the city or is a neighborhood adding roads faster than people, or is it adding people faster than roads? And you really want to make sure that you are um, over time filling in those existing roads, or if you're going to build new roads, that you really make sure that they're being used efficiently, so that the city is not multiplying its expenses faster than it's growing in population. So this helps clarify that kind of change. As I mentioned in the presentation, I think it's very important to pair this metric with some kind of indicator for the efficiency of block sizes, because it could lead you to create very, very strung out large block areas. So it needs to be combined with having a certain number of intersections per hectare, or that sort of indicator. You want an efficient network for walking around, as well as a network with lots of people per meter.
What it tells me is that your work could be extremely useful in the definition of sprawl.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think so.
As a policy, as a provincial land use policy or anything like that, the guidelines and all that, that if you're if you have certain indicators, maybe add to the ones that you have, so you have a bunch of them. And if you get 70% or 80%, below a certain, it's sprawl, so you can say no. And
Right.
and also, I think we have to understand that developers, they want to know what are the rules,
Right.
and they'll work to those rules. They'll try to go and get to that, and if they can't, they'll negotiate, they'll do whatever. But I think your work is great. I think it could contribute to better defining sprawl, which is a major problem in the cultural side of things in Atlantic Canada.
Thank you so much, Gerard.
Thank
Frank?
you. There's one more. Yeah, exactly, Frank. Go ahead.
Are you pointing at me?
Yes.
Paul? Frank Flanagan?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. We saw your raised hand.
Great. Have a two-part question. Did you say early in your presentation that you examine roads that provide services to houses and removed all provincial roads, even if they had houses on them?
No, not all provincial highways. The divided highways, essentially, right? In Nova Scotia, the 100 series highways and the equivalent to that in other provinces. In that article, that academic article speaks in greater depth which categories of roads and highways are those that we have excluded. So essentially, in Statistics Canada. In Statistics Canada ranks, it was rank 1 and rank 2 of roads, which was the Trans-Canada Highway and other major ones.
Okay. And the second question is, do you differentiate within municipalities? You mentioned urban and suburban, and did you differentiate between serviced road length and unserviced road length? In other words, those that have water and sewer services in the municipalities or more urban areas, and did you differentiate that from suburban areas where there may be wells and septic tanks and no amount of services? The cost would be certainly different for the infrastructure in both those cases. Just wondered if that was factored into your numbers.
Yeah, in that first round of research that we did, that distinction was not considered, simply also because looking at the cost side of things, we really were only looking at maintenance of potholes, regular maintenance of roads, snow plowing in the winter, and reconstruction after the end of the lifespan. So we were also on the cost side looking only on the road aspects and not on any underground infrastructure, nor did we look at sidewalks or lighting or anything like that. So in that sense, we did treat all of the roads that were part of these census metropolitan areas the same way.
Yeah, and a key point there is, we will. Some of the costs of roads in downtown areas were, not in a sense calculated enough because you have, multiple lanes and traffic lights and all of this. That being said, we know that the majority of cars that are on those roads are actually from these more distant places. The reason why we need these more expensive roads is because you have people driving there from far away. So for this, we just looked at the amount of road network per person. You can certainly do deeper dives on those calculations, and for a full accounting of costs and revenue, getting away from the simplistic indicator that we think is a useful tool, but not an answer to everything. But for a full accounting, I would recommend looking at the work of Urban 3 and Joel Minicozy specifically. That's really his wheelhouse. They do amazing work really fleshing that out. They do come to very similar results. So that's encouraging that we're not, making up unicorns and Santa Claus. But we do want to underline that we are talking about a indicator that has uses and also limitations.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Got a few more minutes. Great discussion. If not, I know, I think it's safe to say that as planners, it's a concept that we inherently understand. But I know for me personally, it's always really helpful to have a methodical way of confirming or proving, I guess, this theory, and that we can then use this information, which includes real data, to present it to whether it's council or the public, or even within our own organizations. So
we have one more question here. Caitlin, do you mind if we
no, by all
question? So Nick asks, have you looked at provincial funding models for municipalities which use road kilometers per person and similar metrics? New Brunswick has a community funding model that uses road kilometer per person, a density factor, and others. Nick, would you like to share more with us about that? I don't think Paul or I were aware of that. And Nick doesn't have a working mic. So Nick, thank you for letting us know that, though. That's so interesting that New Brunswick is already incentivizing less road length per person. That's really encouraging things to move in the right direction. I guess just a few last words to finish up here. I think what this pieces together is that, it's not just about reducing costs. When we look at the full picture of the research, it's about reducing costs, generating more wealth on our streets, and creating a network of streets where people can lead convenient, quick lives that are low cost, and where each person is burdened with low cost, while the community as a whole is generating an enormous amount of wealth. So I hope that these indicators will help us build those kind of communities, because we don't want to be, leading our communities into a state of bankruptcy and debt with all the infrastructure that we hang around their neck. We want to create places that are really productive and efficiently use the investments that we make today. So I just really want to thank you all for your time.
And a big thank you to Tristan and Paul for presenting today, and to all of you for joining. Time is a precious commodity, and we certainly appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for the great turnout. This is amazing to see so many names and here in the chat, and yeah, many of them familiar. Thanks for coming out.
Hopefully next time it will be at API in person. So
excellent.
thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Thanks.
Thank you.
That was great.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
See you.
Take care.